Going to move to the next level of prismatic organization. The recognition that groups exist, very, very important. My advice to you is to identify and then to cultivate informal leaders. And these are going to be the leaders of informal groups. Now, this will require some art. It's part of that politics of management, if you will. Made all the more difficult because you're also going to be judged, and you should judge yourself with respect to issues of equity and fairness. So on the one hand, I'm going to be suggesting, imploring you to be fair with all of your employees, and at the same time to make a deliberate effort to identify and then cultivate the leaders, certain leaders of certain informal groups that exist within the organization. Part of this stems from recognition that leadership is a social, psychological phenomenon. That follower behavior and the perceptions of followers are just as important as the thoughts and behaviors of leaders. There was a story that I heard many, many years ago about a bunch of Cub Scouts who go strolling by a farmer out on some country lane. They're just having fun. And then the farmer waits and waits and waits, and hundreds of yards behind them comes this middle-aged guy also wearing shorts and a brown uniform. He says, "I'm their leader." Okay. All right, that might be your perception, right? But you might want to get closer to the front, right? There's a time to lead from behind, but there's a lot of time to lead from the front. So the perceptions of who's leading that pack becomes awful doggone important. And by the way, I use the word pack, so maybe I should talk about Cub Scouts. Did I say Boy Scouts? Cub Scouts? Okay. I would argue that it's important to acknowledge and selectively validate informal groups. And here, your choice of validating groups that are humane, whose values are consonant with, or at least not incompatible with, organizational values that are pronounced, that are important to goal attainment, that are productive and contribute to goal attainment. Those are among the kind of groups that I would think that I would tend to try to encourage and try to validate and acknowledge. How you deal with groups that are more resistant or hostile and their leaders involves a different set of tasks. And that is what we're addressing here. I would suggest that it's important for you to confront, woo, or eventually break up, if at all possible, counterproductive groups. Focus on their informal leaders, but don't ignore the membership that willingly follows those as well. We all have experience with this, not necessarily that we were the targets of it, but many of us have been, because I'm thinking back to primary school, grade school, when teachers would simply take a bunch of kids who were enjoying one another perhaps a bit too much in class and separate them. Okay, you go to that desk from now on, Ms. Jenkins. Oh, yeah. As recently as last week? What? You know?
Can I ask a
Of course.
question real quick?
Yeah, of course you can.
Did we not have a question on tonight's quiz about conflict?
Is conflict always bad in an organization?
But is that what the question asked?
Yeah, that was
Is it
essentially what the
always
question.
Bad?
That the manager should always avoid conflict among staff.
That he should try to break it up?
All the time, every time, yeah. And again, that was a notion here. Go back to Michael Koser, and the functions of social conflict. All the variety of ways in which conflict can actually promote productivity, can promote definition, can promote cohesion, depending upon how you configure things, perceptions, etc. Yeah.
In relation to this PowerPoint point.
In relation to this particular thing?
Yeah.
Conflict isn't necessarily bad at all. For example, let's run it up the flagpole and see who salutes. Is an invitation to critically dissect ideas. Conflict can be a very, very important impediment to groupthink, which is what you want. You know, you want people to say, wait a minute, I know that there's a lot of enthusiasm for this idea right now, but I'm really opposed to that for this particular reason. Thank goodness there are people who would be willing to offer principled objections or intellectually driven objections to these kind of things. Now, if it degenerates into name calling, that's rarely productive of good relationships, or it can be. It depends upon what the setting is. If we're talking about social work conventional settings, we're talking about the people who inhabit social work roles, we're talking about a professional value system and our mores of behavior, then it's less likely. If you're talking about people, mostly men, who are working in a construction site, for example, with entirely different kind of, or many, many different kind of norms, their own kind of subculture, just as ours represents a subculture, then the name calling, etc., may simply be another kind of ritual that actually has affirmative kind of elements to that.
So the break point really is then in making a decision whether or not to break up this kind of group, or
Yeah,
if they become counterproductive.
Are they? Is it counterproductive? That's right. Is
conflict causing them to become,
or are they causing conflict that itself then becomes counterproductive? Are the members of this group willing to engage in other kinds of behavior that are actually promoting goal attainment? Are they willing to learn? Are they open to criticism and to suggestion and to leadership? Right? Are they closed to those kind of things? Right? Are they destructive of a kind of environment and a destructive of a kind of course that you regard as essential to achieve goals? Those are some of the things that you would consider. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm fair enough by the word glue. I can see confronting and I can see breakup. But how would you want to glue counterproductive?
Sometimes groups are counterproductive because they haven't been given the opportunity to be productive. They haven't been given the resources they need to do a difficult job. It may not even be a difficult job. They just haven't been given the resources to do the job effectively. They may not have been given the proper instruction or context within which to do the job itself. So it may be, and I'm going to go back on a strategy of change that Roland Warren, I've mentioned Roland Warren's name to you many, many times. All right? Roland Warren argues that there are different levels of provocation, of significance, of the potential of damage to others that can be involved in change strategies. And so his argument is move tactically from least destructive to the most destructive strategies that are available to you. Don't just jump to the most destructive kind of process. Just don't jump to a conflict strategy. So if you can use a consensus strategy, then use a consensus strategy. If you can use a campaign strategy where you encourage a belief, some kind of acknowledgement of the rightness of your position, and move to that. But if you move to a contest strategy, these are in order. A contest, consensus, the notion that everybody is on the same page, we can get there. Campaign, we disagree, but I think I can persuade you, you think you can persuade me, let's engage in that. One of us will be persuaded to the position of the other. A contest strategy, we disagree. At some point in time, we acknowledge that we're not going to agree, but we can agree on the parameters around which we'll make a decision to move forward. So maybe that's just going to be a vote. Whoever gets the most vote wins. We agree to that. Let's go to the vote. Contest. And then there's conflict strategy. And the notion of conflict strategy is once this is all over, only one of us is going to be standing. Okay? Back in the 60s, a lot of particularly student activists wanted to go right to conflict strategies. That was part of a Marxian approach here, and it was part of the zeitgeist at the time as well. Right? Warren's argument, my argument, because I adopted it from Warren, is move tactically or choose tactically the least offensive, the least of the dramatic, if you will, of these kind of strategies. So it could be that by offering direction, support, resources, feedback, etc., what had appeared to be a recalcitrant group may actually be very, very productive for you. So why start out by trying to confront them argumentatively, let's say, or destructively? Why try to break them up so that they cease to exist as a group when you might have a lot of loyalty, relationships, inherent leadership within a group that developed over time, and it may well be amenable to a consensus or a campaign approach. That would be my argument for that. Right?
You offer them the resources and show them the opportunities. A lot of times they will be the most loyal. If there's a project, like in a kitchen or something, to them, they were giving the most real resources and things like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you may have been the very first manager or administrator who actually validated their ability to contribute if given the opportunity and the resources to do that. That's a distinct possibility. Or that you showed them, that you validated them as people enough to have invested yourself in that, let's say, more hopefully than maybe they've experienced in the past. But it's not Pollyanna, right? I said that like I'm from some other area than I'm actually from. It's not Pollyanna. You don't say this is Pollyanna. I mean, this. I don't have any idea, but it's not any region that I came from. And as you develop your skills and your sensitivity, your accurate empathy to this, you may also develop a perception that you can sense what strategy is appropriate. You might just actually kind of make certain kind of tentative offers to test it out and then go right to a strategy that you think would work. My concern about that would simply be, are you closing yourself off unnecessarily to other options that may have been available to you, right? Let's move on to looking at the formally constituted organization. And again, how you conceptualize, what you conceptualize as the formally constituted organization is a dynamic choice that you get to make, and you don't have to be consistent with issues or over time, as we've talked about earlier. But I think these things remain constant. First thing, assess, assess, assess. As social workers, frequently we're so committed to the intervention that we quickly jump to an effort to change before we really understand what the situation is. And that can be true with individuals, it can be true with families, it can be true with natural or artificial groups, it can certainly be true of organizations as well. So for example, is the challenge to the organization as you defined it one of initiation of structure? In other words, is there a need to create new policies, new procedures, new positions and the relationships among those positions in order to achieve work? One of the things we can almost always count on is that the organization as given, as we receive it, as we step into an organization, right, was not built to deal with contemporary modern problems. Now, by modern problems, I don't mean 21st century problems. I'm talking about the problems the organization is facing today. The organization as structured and the informal processes that develop over time are solutions to problems that people encountered years ago. And that once the organizational forms come into being, whether intentional or unintentional, spontaneous, and institutionalized as informal organization, those are things that addressed issues of yesteryear. So how well does the organization as received and as configured today, how well is it prepared to meet the challenges that you face as a manager, as an administrator in that organization today, with the environment that you're experiencing today, and the operative goals that you're responsible for responding to today? Right? So is it initiation? Is it maintenance? In other words, is the major issue that of maintaining a structure and processes and relationships that are functional for goal achievement now? In your leadership, the readings that you've done on leadership, do you remember Stodgill as a name, or the Ohio State Studies? Came out of World War II. It really, really pushed leadership studies forward in a very, very important way. And Stodgill and his colleagues differentiate between what they call initiation of structure and consideration. Initiation of structure, another term for that is task-oriented leadership. Consideration is emotionally laden, emotionally sensitive leadership. And some of Stodgill's followers, who then went to University of Michigan, began to differentiate, I think in a very important way, between the initiation of structure, that is creating structure anew or creating change within organizational structures, versus maintenance, maintaining organizations as is, right? And if you've got a functioning organization, well, if you've got an organization that's functioning well and producing what it's supposed to do, it's doing its job, you know the adage, right? Don't fix it if it ain't broke. Probably pretty good thinking goes behind that adage. So how do you maintain that kind of thing? Many of us will find that we are drawn to initiation or drawn to maintenance as differentially challenging and differentially rewarding kinds of task leadership, and of the kind of environments and the kind of problems that would therefore call for that kind of leadership. Doesn't mean that if you're really drawn and find yourself excited about task initiation, that you can't do a good job with maintenance kind of things, but it's probably not going to push your buttons in exactly the same way. Remember the law of the hammer? Give a 4-year-old a hammer for a Christmas gift and all of a sudden everything needs pounding? Okay. So if you learn a bunch of skills that are really designed for the initiation of change, even in an environment that's productive and stable, you will look for opportunities to create change because that's your hammer. And particularly if that hammer matches your own kind of psychological, emotional inclinations, it's not a surprise that you're going to want to go about creating change. That may not be the appropriate thing to do. Right? So as we're going to talk a bit later on, knowing yourself becomes really important here. Knowing the set of skills that you have, how that meshes with personality, with background, etc., with inclination, becomes an important point of insight into this kind of thing. So assess. Work to align the goals and priorities of your department or division or whatever with the organization's operative goals. And here the watchword, the motto is, to your bosses, help me achieve your goals. More than anything else, I think, that I've learned in the study of organizations and management, it's actually right there. It's right here. And I was fortunate enough to kind of learn that in the process of doing my dissertation many, many years ago. In an organizational setting like the university, for example, so many people will approach their need for additional resources based upon realistic, accurately perceived, beautifully argued needs that a department or a program might have, but interpreted narrowly, interpreted within the context of a particular department or of a particular academic major or of a particular constituency, the students. All right? What happens if you take that same department? What happens if you take the same issue? All right, the need for resources to develop certain kind of programming or to support certain kind of quality teaching or research opportunities for students or for faculty or whatever, and cast it in terms of the university's operative goals. What happens if you frame it by way of aligning program within the department so that if we're given the resources we need for our department, not only do we get to do what we want to do, but we're actually helping you achieve broader, more significant, wider organizational goals for the university. Which argument is more likely to be successful in calling down resources from a broader institutional environment? Their goals. The latter argument, correct? All right. You know, the squeaking wheel gets greased, but what happens if every wheel squeaks? You only have a limited amount of grease. Well, If everybody's calling for resources and I don't have enough resources to give more to everybody, I'm more likely to give those resources to folks who are interested in helping me with whatever my agenda happens to be. If you align the goals and priorities of your department, division, or whatever with the broader and operative goals. Remember what an operative goal is? Is it the mom, American flag, apple pie kind of statement? Or is it the thing that the organizations are actually trying to achieve? It's the latter, isn't it? If you align your position with those prioritized, most significant, most important, most pressing operative goals, chances are you're going to be able to draw down more resources that are going to be able to help you. We're going to come to that in the next unit. Right? Prioritize. You can't do everything. What's most important? This will be the most difficult thing for those of you who are compulsive to do, because you're going to do everything. The obsessive compulsive person is going to want to do everything. Prioritizing is difficult. Prioritizing is essential. It's going to help you demonstrate your leadership. It's going to help you demonstrate your ability to realistically assess your environment. I'm going to argue that it's important for you to align selectively certain informal practices, informal groups, informal policies, etc., with the formal structures so that you can better bring them under control, better rationalize them. One of the things that we know is that in every organization over time, an informal organization will develop. The informal organization will always operate at variance with the structures, with the prescriptions, the rules, if you will, of the formal organization. Now that's going to happen because that's essential to happen for organizations to achieve even minimally goal achievement, goal attainment. The environment is far more dynamic than the ability of people to forecast that or even formally to respond to it in many, many occasions. But the more the informal organization develops, the more that's an element of the organization or an aspect of the organization that's outside of management's control. Now, you're never going to be able to incorporate all of the informal organization, in a sense, tame it, and bring it within the sphere of formal organizational operation. I wouldn't even begin to suggest that you would do that. But to let all aspects, particularly certain critical ones, operate informally with their own logic, if you will, or responsive to their own historically set problems or issues, strikes me as something that would be counterproductive in the long run. That at the very least it would be important to monitor them, and many times it would be important to modify them. That's what I'm talking about here. I'm going to suggest that you not be afraid of failure, but don't invite it. Take reasonable risks, but consider the significance of failure in these situations. And even as I would argue that this is good advice for you, the manager, I would suggest that, again, considering the significance of consequences, that you adopt this particular position for your subordinates as well. It's one thing for you to say, hey, boss, let me take some risks, but I'm not going to let anybody under me take those kind of risks. Right? So consistency is important here. But the significance of accurately perceiving the consequences of failure is very, very important. I had a boss once, is it president of university, tell me in response to an initiative that I wanted to pursue. And he leaned across the table when he did it. He says, he knew it was going to cost him thousands and thousands of dollars for this thing. He says, okay, I'm going to give you the approval. You go ahead and do this. I'm going to give you $40,000 to start this. But don't you lose a single penny. That's really what he did. This is to the camera. Don't you lose a single penny. And I had a vice president for administration and finance who was at the table with me. And later on, a couple of weeks later, he goes, I couldn't believe when he did that. He says, I just couldn't believe what position he put you in. He says, that was just awful. You know, you got to be able to take risks. You got to be able to take risks. We made $400,000 the first year with that initial $40,000 investment and some $120,000 that followed it. But it was $400,000 of profit. I'm pleased with that. I was startled when he leaned across with that finger wave. No, I'll tell you, it was like, geez, what did I get myself into now? Okay. I'm going to argue that it's important for you to restructure as necessary, but be sensitive always to the quantity and to the magnitude of the changes that you're trying to bring about. Even an excessive number of little changes can be overwhelming to people. They begin to feel that the earth is shifting out underneath their feet and they don't know what tomorrow is going to offer, right? That notion of surprises isn't ever a good thing in terms of personnel evaluations, right? Well, we've got to be able to help people understand that change is going to be inevitable in organizations, but there should be some constancy. There should be some points of reference for people, too. And it's not that we have to preserve those forever, but let's give people something to hang their hats on for periods of time without changing the landscape, the organizational landscape all around them chaotically. So restructuring is one thing, but when people begin to perceive that that is an environment of chaos, we've moved to another extreme. Work to shape culture. Work to shape culture. Your role, my role as a manager, involves trying to shape culture. But as we've talked about earlier today, nobody systematically creates culture. The best you're going to be able to do is to be a player in that kind of thing. Think of culture as an organic, almost living kind of thing that may have a logic of its own, but you can be a player in it. You can be part of that. As part of this, I would argue that it's important for you to express and to personalize the important values that you're trying to either embed or you're trying to preserve or emphasize in organizational culture. The more you can personalize it, the more you can point to a particular individual who did a particular thing as important as an exemplar, as a guiding example or defining example of what we want by way of people, the more it's tangible, the more it's understandable to people. Right? So when you have to make a choice between conducting your library research and attending to your newborn baby, you go to the library. You go to the library. That's right. That's what Mallory did. She did it just last week. Let's applaud her. Way to go, man. Stand up. Stand up, Mallory. Stand up. It's so important, man. Wow. I know what you're all thinking, too. Man, I want to be like Mallory. You know, I can't wait till I have a baby. I'm going to leave that baby. Okay. Accumulate and celebrate successes. Right? Help develop within the culture a recognition of when you succeed. Right? When you succeed. And if you have to start with the little things, start with the little things. We talked about that earlier. Right? But don't pass up an opportunity to celebrate the successes that you're having. Now, that notion of what have you done for me lately, I think that's really important. I think that's really important. Successes for your subordinates, for the people who are in your department or division or whatever, probably have something of a natural lifespan. That can be fairly long. Right? For your bosses, the lifespan of your successes are likely to be far more restricted, far shorter. So what have you done for them lately? Let's move on to another level, the environmental level. Again, depending upon how you define what the formally constituted organization is, whether it's your division or a department or a localized setting or a larger bureaucracy or whatever, what's left outside of that, beyond that, encompassing that, represents the environment. Really important. Accumulate resources and then invest them frugally. There used to be a show on TV called The Frugal Grocer. Did anybody ever watch that? It was really good. Remember that? Yeah. No, it was a bald-headed guy with glasses. He was actually a Presbyterian minister who had this cooking show. It was really a good show. It was very, very popular for quite a number of years. And it was called The Frugal Grocer, and at one point in time, he defined frugality for those of us who were viewing it. He says, it doesn't mean cheap. He says, some of these ingredients are going to be pretty expensive. He says, but the notion of frugality is that you're being careful in spending only really what you have to for a high-quality ingredient. And then you're using that ingredient only to achieve the kind of taste or aroma sensation or texture that you want for it. Nothing more, but nothing less as well. Doesn't mean cheap, but it means a very deliberate, very conscious application or use of the resources that you have available to you. You know? Scottish. As a matter of fact, he might have been, right? Presbyterian. Almost certainly, no matter what organization you're going to be working in or where you find yourself now, there aren't enough resources available to do the job optimally. Hey, welcome to the real world, right? Why should that be any different for any of the rest of us? Well, it's not. Okay? So your ability to acquire resources, to call them down from the environment can be absolutely critical, because one thing is that you're going to be involved in a political process, budgeting political process, management political process. Right? There is something of a zero-sum game out there. Your ability to draw down resources for your department, for your division, for your organization at some point in time will mean that some other division, department, or organization isn't going to get at least a portion of what's coming to you instead. So that in and of itself will demonstrate some very significant successes on your part and some skills that are involved there. As a matter of fact, there are theorists, Yuckman and Seashore come to mind, who argue for the ability to acquire resources as the signature of organizational effectiveness. And remember, we talked about weeks ago Katz and Kahn, the social psychology of organizations. Their notion of effectiveness was efficiency and political effectiveness. What was political effectiveness? The ability to acquire resources from the environment. So as we're talking here about the ability to accumulate resources, we're talking about your ability to be effective in an essential task for organizational survival, essential task for organizational goal achievement. And then how you invest those strategically, carefully, without losing a single penny, becomes part of frugality here. Accumulate friends and supporters. Now, I talked about developing champions among the people that you supervise. Within the environment, it's also important to accumulate friends and supporters. We'll come back to that in a bit. But it's an important part of the political dimensions of surviving management. Position the organization strategically. This is huge. This is huge. What do I mean by that? Rhetorical question. Well, first of all, it's not simply branding. Branding's important. Branding's the buzzword now in terms of management and customers and developing markets. What's branding mean? I mean, it is a big, big thing now. So what's it mean? Name recognition is an important part of that. Continue.
Somebody thinks of that product, they're going to think of you.
That's exactly right. And it's not just product either, is it? What other things can it be that are a part of brand? Image. Certain kind of values that you want to communicate to them. It might be service. It might be high-level technologies. It might be commitment to relationship. Whatever kind of elements that are perceived as truthful with regard to the organization's relationship to important markets or constituencies. Okay. Color. What are our branding colors? I heard the president of the university just last week talk about branding ETSU and the fact that there are multiple colors that are used to convey the image of ETSU. Red, white, and blue, blue and gold, a wide variety of other ones. Officially, blue and gold. So don't be surprised if you see more consistent use of the blues, special blues and the special golds that are part of the ETSU signature as part of a branding process. But positioning an organization strategically doesn't reduce the branding, although that's one element of it. Right. Among the things to consider when you're positioning an organization strategically is the sense of mission, the product that you have, whether that's service, whether that's a commodity or whatever, how it is that you relate and who it is with whom you relate. In terms of the cooperation that's required to move your organization forward to achieve your goals. Matter of fact, there are have been people in the organizational theory literature that speak of organizational goals as driven by, defined by the nature of interorganizational relationships that you have. Think about the agencies within which you work or have your field placements. Chances are almost certain, I will say they're certain, that success, goal attainment for your particular organizations require relationships with other organizations in your environment. Okay? So on the one hand, we're used as social workers to think in terms of effectiveness and goals as the product that we want to eventually produce. Well, that's not bad, but let's kind of look at it from a different dimension. What are the relationships we need with other organizations? What it is that they give us, what it is that we give them that's necessary for that particular product? And you realize that it's almost two sides of the same coin. So that we might think of goals not as the product, but goals as in terms of the relationships that we're going to have with organizations. Now, one of the advantages of that is that it helps us to begin to think strategically that we're not in this alone, that we have to cultivate very specifically relationships with other organizations or members of other organizations around particular exchanges, what they're going to give us, what we're going to give them. Who are our competitors in this? Right? Who's out there who might be in a position to do the same kind of thing that we want to do, or to have the same kind of relationships that we want to develop? Do they have a systematic advantage over us with regard to certain of those elements? What are the advantages that we have with regard to them to do these kind of things? Many times it doesn't make much sense for us to really invest, going back to investing resources frugally, to invest heavily in an environment that's likely to be highly competitive, particularly if we assess our competitors as being better positioned to do the kind of things that we really want to do. We may have to find something else that's more promising for long-term survival as a major emphasis for our particular program. Now, what I'm talking about here is really part and parcel of strategic planning. Remember, your authors talked about strategic planning. We've talked a bit about strategic planning here. I think as we teach this class in future semesters, I'm going to put much more emphasis on strategic planning because I think it's so important. Strategic planning, the assessment of the strengths and the opportunities, the weaknesses and the constraints that exist within an environment and that exist within the organization. What are the opportunities that the environment gives us? What is the environment asking of us? What are we prepared to give? What are the resources that we need to do that? What's available in the environment? What's scarce or unavailable in the environment? Who are our competitors? Who are our friends? These are the kind of questions that go into making decisions about how we position the organization different from other organizations in our sphere, in our kind of area of operations, so that we have and cultivate particular advantages that they've overlooked. What gives us the ability to survive in that social Darwinistic environment of the survival of the fittest. By the way, strategic planning, ongoing. My position would be every year. You're constantly involved in thinking through these kind of issues. You may never actually implement a plan the way it's written in a strategic plan, but that's not the point. The point of strategic planning is that you're thinking through this multidimensional environment of opportunities and constraints, of strengths and weaknesses, so that you're better able to identify those kind of things internally and externally, that you're involved in a process of renewal and of strengthening and developing the organization, and that you're poised to take advantage of opportunities that the environment provides you because you can more quickly recognize them and more quickly respond to them. Now, the actual nature of the response may be almost spontaneous in the sense of the way it's formed. But that's a realistic choice that you're likely to make, or that others in the organization make, based upon an ongoing internal and external assessment. Oh, and then there's the self. Okay? Now you know where I'm going with this because you got the handout, right? But let's play along, all right? Know yourself. Very, very important to know yourself. Now this is true regardless of whether you're a manager, administrator, clinician, case manager, or whatever. Right? The most important tool you have in your professional toolbox as a social worker is you, your personhood, your intelligence, your background, your experience, your empathy. Now you can change certain of those elements. I think you can work to improve your accurate empathy. You can work to identify and improve certain kind of intervention skills with technologies that are available. You can do those kind of things. But it's very, very important that you have an accurate appraisal of who you are. In clinical work, there's this adage, you can't lead a client where you can't go yourself. So if there are emotional issues that are still active for you, that there are emotional impediments for you, right? You can't help a client move through their equivalents of those kind of things because you can't go there yourself. As a manager, it's important for you to realize that you bring a lot to the table for the person that you are, for the experiences that you have. But if you've got 5 years of experience at lower level management, you haven't yet perhaps had the opportunity to experience middle management and top level executive kind of positions. And so to task yourself with the challenges that require those kind of experiences wouldn't be fair for you or fair for others. So knowing who you are and knowing what gifts you have to meet the challenges of management as presented by your position, as presented by the day, becomes particularly important. Demonstrate competence. Super important. You want people, I would suspect, to respect you as a manager or as an administrator or as a supervisor. Respect is something most of us want. It's easier to manage people if the people you're managing respect you. And we go back to Portnoy and those competencies of leadership, and ethical leadership, and interpersonal leadership, and technical leadership become important here. What I'm talking about now with regard to competence is the technical leadership. Doesn't mean that you have to know therapy better than any of your therapists if you're a manager or administrator of a community mental health center. But you should know something about the challenges and the techniques and the issues involving psychotherapy, the experience of emotional distress, and psychiatric disorder. But you better know a lot about planning, organizing, staffing, budgeting, etc. The particular set of issues and technologies that are critical to your position as an administrator. And we go back to POSITICORB as a very historic and conventional way of kind of arraying those kind of skills and competencies. I'm going to argue that it's important for you to always improve yourself in your role as a manager or administrator. Right? Celebrate your own successes, yes, but don't be satisfied with the professional that you are. There's always an opportunity here to identify an area where you need more skill, more experience, more development, or need to rethink how you've been doing things. Don't be content. You'll rarely be disappointed, I think. Have a vision. Have a vision. Know where you want to go. Know what the organization, what you want that organization to look like. Know what that product should look like. That's the image of goal attainment. This is how we get there. This is how we relate to one another as we get there. This is how we work with one another to get there. These are the values that are important for us. Have a vision. Now, I'm going to argue that it's important for you to model flexibility. I remember reading a book a number of years ago about adult psychopathology. And the author was making the argument that regardless of diagnosis, the signature of psychopathology is rigidity. It's rigidity in how one thinks, it's rigidity in how one feels, it's rigidity in how one behaves with regard to the issues that confront the self during life. So if it's true that rigidity is a signature for psychopathology, then flexibility without chaos seems to me to be a signature for a healthy adaptive personality. And there's a social work adage, meet the client where the client is. My argument for you is, as a manager, as a supervisor, as a leader of people, model flexibility. Don't expect people to reach to where you are without you first and effectively reaching to where they are. That's part of the responsibility of leaders. Now, the responsibility of followership is to accept that invitation for growth. Right? Model flexibility. Oh, and model consistency. Right? What is it? What's your opinion? What do you think you should be consistent about in terms of your modeling? Because, frankly, modeling flexibility and modeling consistency can be perceived as opposing prescriptions. I could also be wrong. Duh.
It can be consistently
Consistently flexible?
flexible.
Nice, nice, nice. Okay.
And you need to be flexible in some areas and consistent in others.
An example, please.
For example, reviewing cases with an employee, you may do the whole think outside the box. What are some other things we could talk about, other ways we can do it? And yet your management style is consistent in that your team knows that you're available on a regular basis for them to staff cases with.
Yeah, that's a good example of that. Let's go back to Portnoy's notion of those 3 competencies that are important for leaders to demonstrate. Right? Might there be a variety of ways in which somebody can demonstrate ethical competencies? But is it ever appropriate to be, in a sense, inconsistent in the demonstration of those ethical competencies? In other words, isn't it important to be consistently ethical in your relationships with people, even as there might be a variety of ways in which one demonstrates that ethical competence? Values, critical values for the organization. And it might be accountability, it might be innovation, it might be performance, it might be client focused. Right? Seems to me that those are the kind of things that we want to be consistent about. We want there to be a color of those kind of values in all of the things that we do. We ought to be able to find a crosswalk, if you will, to those particular values in the kind of programming and the kind of demonstration of self that we exhibit at work. But the ways in which we do that may be highly variable over time based upon a whole wide variety of contingencies. That's what I'm trying to speak to. Now, what it is that you choose to model, right, in terms of where you're being consistent and the areas in which you're willing to be flexible, that's going to vary from person to person. We have a set of professional values and ethical codes that begin to define those kind of things. It provides for some kind of consistency across individuals. But in the end, we're all individual people and we'll express those kind of things somewhat differently, one from another. I'm going to argue that it's important for you to model transparency without being an open book. Both, I think, are very, very important. Okay? Boundaries. Boundaries is the thing to remember here. Few people in an organization want a boundless supervisor. Right? And those are probably people I would suggest that you be very wary of. Those are the people who are more likely to kind of exploit you as a supervisor as opposed to working with you when they can see into your soul that way. And why? You don't have a right to inflict that kind of stuff of you, that person stuff, on your employees. That's not appropriate. By the same token, your employees shouldn't have to guess at who you are. There are going to be things as an administrator or manager, information that you have that you should not share with the people whom you supervise. That would be a violation of boundary, that would be a violation of ethics, that would be a violation of policy, maybe even be a violation of law. Certainly a violation of best practices. People should understand, and you can help them understand. You can help your employees, you can educate them to certain kind of limits. And your exercise of appropriate limits in what you communicate is itself modeling interpersonal and ethical competencies. Right? If you know something about me, for example, and you're not telling somebody else, then I have a greater sense of trust that you are the person that you say that you are. That these are values that are going to be respected and practiced, not simply written down. Go ahead.
Like at the YWCA, I'm on the board of directors and on the junior board. We were actually writing a confidentiality agreement up that what happens in board and on subcommittees doesn't go out of those subcommittees to the staff members because it will change. There's possibilities of changing their futures that we just can't discuss until it's put on paper and it's been signed.
That's exactly right. And if people think that what they say in a board meeting will then go back to staff members, a lot of folks will pull back in terms of their ability to be frank, their willingness to be honest in very critical discussions at the board. It will probably diminish the quality of the discussions in the board, at least in terms of being sensitive to a variety of issues.
And also, I'm going to be serving on an evaluation and assessment committee through the United Way in the upcoming months.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot sit on an evaluation and assessment of the YWCA because I am a board member and it's a conflict of interest. So you can't, that falls under the transparency and open book policies.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Transparency is a huge issue now in terms of work environment and management, best practices. But transparency, again, doesn't mean boundless or boundaryless a presence within the organization. So I would argue that you think in this term, you think of this issue in the context particularly of Portnoy. And you know how important I think Portnoy has been. My argument for you also is have a plan B. Now have a plan B for the organization. It's always good to have one or two variations of a particular goal or particular a procedure or strategy. Not everything you try is going to succeed. Right? Not everything that you're going to argue for is going to be accepted. So to be able to demonstrate flexibility, but also to be able to maintain momentum and maintain control, appropriate levels of managerial control, very important to have that plan B in mind. Also, have a plan B in mind for yourself. Because you see what's coming next. And this is an important one. Right? There's no protection from stupidity. Right? There's no protection from stupidity. In the end, your ability to do a phenomenally good job guarantees you nothing. Your demonstration of interpersonal, ethical, and technical competency guarantees you nothing. Right? You can be the most effective organizational manager or administrator organization has ever had. What does it guarantee you? Nothing. That's right. Nothing. Because there can still be other people involved who, for their very own reasons, whether rational or not, might end it all for you. Might end it all for you. Now, there's a difference between having your job ended and having your career ended. Okay? There's a difference between being terminated in a position and terminating your professional identity, your professional practice, your career. A plan B provides for the important personal, familial options that can see you over the hard times. One thing you know, there are going to be some hard times. We know that. But nobody's come into this profession because you're afraid of that. We know that too. We know that too. Well, there you have it. 30 years of study and 40 years of practice. Condensed into a 2-hour lecture. Hope you have it. All right. Fact is, like I said to you, the very first day of class, I think, I'll give you my best. But I can guarantee you there's stuff here that's wrong. I just don't know what it is. And there's stuff here that works for me, won't necessarily work as well for you, but you'll find ways. That's your challenge. Hope it helps. See you.